I was supposed to be there. I paid for the catering. I booked the venue. I even arranged the flowers, white hydrangeas, my mother's favorite. But I wasn't invited. Instead, I was sitting alone in my studio apartment, watching my Aunt Karen's Facebook live stream. The audio was surprisingly crisp. I heard the clink of silverware, the murmur of guests, and then my mother's voice sharp and clear above the din. She raised her champagne flute. "I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight," she beamed, her face flushed with expensive wine. "And honestly, I have to thank God that Ashley isn't here to ruin the aesthetic with her moodiness." The table erupted in polite laughter. My stomach dropped. Then my sister Jessica chimed in, tossing her hair back. "Seriously, she's useful for writing checks, but God, she's such a social embarrassment. A total freeloader on our brand." Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I looked down at my hands. They were raw. That's the thing people don't tell you about being a high-end floral architect in Savannah. It isn't just arranging pretty petals. It's hauling 50-pound buckets of water at 4 in the morning. It's thorns under your fingernails and sap that won't scrub off no matter how hard you try. My hands built the backdrops for Jessica's lifestyle. She was the face of the brand, a curated illusion of southern charm and effortless grace. I was the infrastructure, the help. For 5 years, I had been the silent partner in the business of being the Millers. My parents lived in a sprawling estate that had been in the family for generations, but the truth was they hadn't actually been able to afford it since 2018. That's where I came in. Every month on the 1st, I transferred $3,500 to their joint account. I told myself it was for the estate upkeep to preserve the legacy. In reality, it was a subscription fee for a family that didn't even offer me a seat at the table. Jessica would post photos of herself in front of the installations I built, tagging her sponsors, but never tagging me. She got the engagement, the brand deals, the adoration. I got the invoices. I funded the electric bill so she could have perfect lighting for her makeup tutorials. My earnings kept the water running so the lawns would remain green for her outdoor shoots. I was the venture capitalist funding a startup that refused to give me equity. And tonight, hearing them call me a freeloader while drinking champagne I paid for, it wasn't just an insult. It was a breach of contract. The studio was quiet, filled with the scent of eucalyptus and cold storage. This was my domain. I had built this business from the ground up, scraping together every cent while they played house in a mansion that was functionally mine. They thought I was weak because I was quiet. They thought I was compliant because I was generous. They didn't understand that in my line of work you have to know exactly when a bloom has turned, when the rot sets in, and when it's time to cut the stem. I looked at the screen again, watching my mother laugh. The rot had set in a long time ago. It started with $60,000. That was the specific number my grandmother left me in her will designated for my tuition. I never saw a cent of it. My parents didn't steal it in the dead of night. They embezzled it in broad daylight, framing it as a family investment. They told me Jessica had been scouted by an agency in Miami, that she needed a portfolio coaching and a wardrobe to match. They said my tuition could wait or that I could take out loans, which I did. They said Jessica's success would lift us all. I was 18, eating instant noodles in a drafty dorm room, scrolling through photos of my sister in a 5-star resort in Tulum, wearing a bikini bought with my future. That was the first bad debt I absorbed. It should have been the last. But financial abuse is a lot like invasive ivy. You don't notice it choking the life out of the garden until the structure starts to crumble. Last winter, the foreclosure notices started arriving. They hid them, of course. I only found out when a process server showed up at the studio looking for my father. I paid the arrears. I paid the property taxes. I became the silent investor in a failing enterprise, convincing myself that I was saving the family home. In reality, I was just enabling their delusions. Why did I do it? Why did I keep writing checks to people who treated me like a line item in their budget? For a long time, I told myself it was loyalty. But looking at it now, under the cold light of this live stream, I realize it was just bad economics. It's what they call the sunk cost fallacy. I had invested so much my childhood, my inheritance, my dignity, that walking away felt like admitting it was all for nothing. I kept paying not because I expected a return on investment, but because stopping would mean acknowledging that the entire venture had been a scam from the start. I was throwing good money after bad, trying to retroactively validate my own suffering. I thought if I paid enough, eventually I would buy my way onto the board of directors. I thought I could purchase their respect. But tonight, listening to them laugh at my expense, the ledger finally balanced. They didn't see me as a partner or a daughter. They saw me as an asset to be liquidated until nothing remained. I looked at the numbers on my banking screen. The sunk costs were gone. I couldn't get them back, but I could stop the bleeding. The market had officially closed. Grief is messy, like spilled water on an arranging table, but tonight I needed to be surgical. I didn't scream or beg for an explanation. The video playing on my second monitor was all the explanation I needed. My mother was still holding court, recounting a story about how I'd embarrassed her at a gala by wearing the wrong shoes, while my sister giggled into her napkin. I turned away from their pixelated faces and opened a new tab. My hands were steady. The anger wasn't hot or chaotic. It was cold, precise, and dangerously calm. I logged into my banking portal first. The recurring transfer was set for the first of the month, $3,500, labeled Estate Maintenance. I clicked Cancel. A dialog box popped up asking if I was sure. I clicked Yes without blinking. Next were the credit cards. I had given them authorized user cards for emergencies, which apparently included weekly spa treatments and designer handbags. I froze the accounts. Then I reported them lost or stolen, ensuring new numbers would be issued only to me. The plastic cards in their wallets were now just scrap metal. Then came the digital infrastructure. The family streaming services, the cloud storage, where Jessica backed up her thousands of selfies, the shared rideshare account. I changed the passwords one by one. Log out of all devices. Confirm. The little spinning wheel on my screen was the only movement in the room. I imagined the screens going dark in the mansion across town, the music cutting out, the sudden inability to summon a car. I was systematically turning off the lights in their world, room by room. It took me 45 minutes to dismantle the financial scaffolding I had spent 5 years building. When I was done, I closed my laptop. The silence in my studio felt different now. It wasn't the silence of being alone. It was the silence of a vault being locked. I looked at the time. It was 12:03 in the morning. My mother was still talking on the live stream, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath her had just vanished. I poured myself a glass of water, took a sip, and finally turned off the feed. The show was over. The chaos began at 9 a.m. The first text came from my mother, not an apology, but a frantic demand. Ashley, the card was declined at the caterer's. Fix it immediately. Jessica has a shoot at noon and needs the props. I didn't reply. I just stared at the message, marveling at the audacity. She didn't even mention the live stream. She didn't mention the insults. She just assumed the ATM was temporarily out of order and I would rush to repair it. By noon, the tone had shifted from annoyance to aggression. "You're overreacting," she texted next. "You know how stress makes us talk. We were just blowing off steam. Turn the money back on. This is childish. Childish." The irony was suffocating. I was childish for refusing to fund the lifestyle of 2 grown women who openly despised me. I scrolled through Instagram. Jessica had posted a story, a black screen with white text. "Some family members are so toxic they'll try to dim your light just because they're jealous. Jealousy is a disease. Get well soon." I almost laughed. Jealousy. They honestly believed I wanted their life. They thought I envied the hollow, curated existence I had been subsidizing. They couldn't conceive of a world where I simply wanted to be left alone with my dignity. They were doubling down, confident that if they squeezed hard enough I would break. They thought this was a tantrum. They didn't realize it was an eviction. By evening, the voicemails started. My father, usually silent on these matters, left a message. His voice was tight, controlled. "Ashley, this has gone far enough. You're embarrassing the family. If you don't unlock the accounts by tomorrow, we're going to have a serious problem." I saved the voicemail. Evidence. They still thought they held the power. They still thought I was the girl who would apologize for taking up space. They didn't know that girl had died the moment I heard them laugh. The facade was wilting, the paint was peeling, and for the first time I wasn't going to grab a brush to fix it. I was going to watch it peel. I needed to know the full extent of the damage. I called Aunt Karen. She agreed to meet me at my studio immediately. Karen wasn't just the aunt who had accidentally live-streamed the dinner. She was a forensic accountant who had been quietly suspicious of my parents' finances for years. She arrived with a briefcase and a grim expression. "I saw the live stream," she said, setting her bag on my workbench. "I should have stopped them. But maybe it's better you heard it." We spent the next 2 hours dissecting the digital trail. I gave her access to the accounts I had frozen, and she started digging. It didn't take long. "Ashley," she said, her voice low, "look at this." She pointed to a recurring monthly payment of $3,700 to a company listed as Digital Horizon Solutions. I frowned. I thought that was for Dad's consulting business website. Karen shook her head. I looked them up. They aren't a web host. They're a reputation management firm based in Eastern Europe. She clicked a few more keys, pulling up a detailed invoice. The services were itemized: premium follower, package engagement, bot network, comment generation. My breath caught in my throat. The parents weren't just wasting money on clothes and dinners. They were spending nearly $45,000 a year to buy fake followers for Jessica. Her entire career, the brand that I was supposedly freeloading off of, was a complete fabrication. Her influence was a mirage paid for with my stolen tuition and my monthly checks. "It's fraud," Karen said bluntly. "They're presenting her as a successful influencer to get small brand deals, but the numbers are fake, and you've been funding the whole charade." I stared at the screen, feeling a wave of nausea. The fame I had felt so inferior to the success they had rubbed in my face, it was all purchased. It was a hollow shell painted gold. I wasn't just the help, I was the unknowing producer of their reality show. The betrayal went deeper than money. It was an orchestrated deception designed to make me feel small, while they stood on my shoulders. I looked at Karen. "Print it," I said. "Print everything." They showed up at my studio at 3 p.m. My father led the charge, storming through the front door, past my terrified assistant with my mother and Jessica, trailing behind like a royal procession. "We need to talk," he barked, slamming a folder onto my front desk. "Now." I stood up slowly from my workbench, wiping soil from my hands. "Get out," I said calmly. "This is a place of business." "Business," Jessica scoffed, looking around at the buckets of wildflowers. "You play with flowers, Ashley. We're talking about real life. Dad needs $45,000 for the sunroom renovation. Contractors are threatening to walk. You're going to write the check today." The sunroom. That was their cover story. I looked at them, really looked at them, and saw not parents or a sister, but 3 desperate grifters whose Ponzi scheme had just collapsed. I reached under my desk and pulled out a heavy binder. I walked around the counter and handed it to my father. "What is this?" he demanded. "It's the ledger," I said. "Every dollar I've given you for the past 5 years. Every bill. Every emergency. It totals $214,000. My mother paled. "Why are you keeping score? We're family." "Because you kept score first," I said, my voice steady. "You kept an invisible ledger where my existence was a debt I could never pay off while Jessica's existence was a credit. You treated my contributions like rent for taking up space in your lives. Well, the lease is up." I pulled out the second document, the report from Karen. "And about that sunroom. I assume you mean the overdue invoice from Digital Horizon Solutions." The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Jessica's face went gray. My father looked like he'd been punched. "I know about the bots," I said, looking directly at my sister. "I know about the fake followers. I know my money didn't go to repairs. It went to buying you an audience because you couldn't build one yourself." Jessica started to cry, but it was the panic of a child caught stealing. "You're ruining everything," she shrieked. "I'm not ruining anything," I said. "I'm just closing the account." I walked to the door and held it open. "Get out. If you ever come back here, I'll call the police. And Dad, good luck with the sunroom." They stared at me for a moment, waiting for me to crack, to apologize, to fix it like I always did. When I didn't blink, they turned and fled, shrinking under the weight of the truth. I locked the door behind them and turned the sign to closed. The fallout wasn't immediate, but it was absolute. Without the monthly payments to Digital Horizon, Jessica's engagement numbers plummeted overnight. The bots disappeared, leaving her with 0 comments and a few confused real followers. Her brand deals dried up within the month. It turns out you can't be an influencer when your influence is repossessed. As for my parents, they didn't rage. They collapsed. It's what psychologists call a narcissistic collapse. When their source of supply, my money, and their public image, Jessica's success, were destroyed simultaneously, they simply imploded. They downsized to a condo 2 towns over, blaming the economy to anyone who would listen. They tried to reach out a few times, sending letters about forgiving and forgetting, but my mailbox was as closed as my wallet. I stood in the center of my studio, surrounded by buckets of fresh peonies and ranunculus. The afternoon sun hit the glass vases, scattering rainbows across the floor. For the first time in my life, I looked at the beauty around me and didn't feel like I was building a backdrop for someone else. This was my work, my profit, my life. I had pruned the dead weight, and finally the garden had room to bloom. If you've ever had to prune the dead weight from your life to let yourself bloom, share this story. You aren't alone in the garden.